Hi, my name's Geneva Barba, and I will be covering Chapter 3, Psychological Theories on Personality. So the chapter begins by covering the three psychological models of the person and theoretical variations. It goes on to give us a little intro of what sociologists look for when dealing with personality. For example, like what is a personality made of? How does personality work or function? How and why does personality change? So, when studying personality, we're looking for things like what makes us do the things that we do, what what motivates us, what drives us, um, and how our thinking process is involved while doing what we do in life. And in this chapter, we're going to go through different theories by different sociologists like Freud, Skinner, Maslow, and Rogers. So, chapter 3 covers psychoanalytical framework, behavioral framework, and phenomenological framework. Freud starts out his study on psychoanalysis by really going through the basic assumptions of human nature. So he explains that there are two different types of drives that we have in life, which is eros and thanatos, which means the urge to live and the urge to die. We are not always aware why we do what we do. And he also explains how we go into this unconscious motivation, and there's in between unconscious and conscious, there's also an intermediate level called the preconscious. Freud's structural model of personality consists of three components. The first one is the id, which is the seedbed of our basic instincts and drives that generate the psychic energy. We are born with the id, but it is not totally inaccessible to our consciousness. For example, the id transforms bodily need, such as hunger, thirst, shelter, and etc. The second component is the ego. It is not present at birth but evolves out of the id in early infancy, beginning stages of life between 6 to 8 months. Unlike the id, which is totally unconscious, the ego dwells on all three levels of consciousness: the unconscious, the preconscious, and the conscious. The third core component of personality is the superego, which evolves out of the ego in early childhood through the learning of social norms and cultural values, primarily from parents. Freud also goes on to explain the dynamics of personality. He also explains the components of personality structure work to produce particular personality characteristics. For example, he lists anxiety and defense mechanisms. According to Freud, anxiety is the expression of a retreat from anger. It is subjectively felt unpleasant emotional state, usually accompanied by feelings of fear and physical sensations in response to a signal of impending danger. Anxiety is only felt by the ego when it cannot satisfy the three masters: reality anxiety, neurotic anxiety, and moral anxiety. Defense mechanisms are unconscious mental strategies used by the ego in an effort to reduce anxiety. They rarely eradicate the underlying causes of anxiety since they distort falsify, avoid, or deny the reality. Some of the different defense mechanisms are repression, which forces impulses driven by anxiety to go away from consciousness; denial, which is rejection to accept reality; reaction formation, which transforms impulses or feelings to the opposite; projection, which shifts the burden; displacement, which is repressed feelings or impulses that are shifted; rationalization, which means ego defense; fixation, attachment of the libido; and regression, which is reverting back to old habits. The first
Freudian
framework that
model of
we're going to cover is
personality
psychoanalytical
based on
theory.
the assumption that personality
So that
is
was
largely determined during
founded
the first
by
4 or
Freud,
5 years of one's
and
life experience.
he really focused on the first
Freudian
framework that we're going to
personality
cover is
development
psychoanalytical
based on
theory.
the assumption that personality
So that was
is largely determined during
founded
the first
by
4 or
Freud,
5 years of one's
and
life experience.
he really focused on studying
Freud called these areas
the different
of
personalities
pleasure or
within people,
excitations
but not only
within the
adults.
organism,
He also studied
erogenous zones.
young infants and newborn
The growing
children,
child passes through a series of
and just kind of really went
stages
into depth of what different personalities we go through
to the latency and
in
to
our
the genital
lives.
stages.
Since the superego has no direct contact with the external world, it makes also unrealistic demands, like the id. The nature of the superego's demand is not biological, but moral or ethical. It is the moral overseer of the personality structure which attempts to control the ego by conscience and ego ideal.
With its 3 masters: the id, the external reality, and the superego. As the executive of the psyche, the ego must perform the crucial role of coordinating the instinctual demand, the environmental requirement, and the moral pressure. Too much or too little psychic investment in a particular component at the expense of other components of personality structure would invite psychopathology. If the ego cannot serve its 3 masters correctly, we have 3 different kinds of anxiety, with each vulnerable to a particular kind of psychopathology. Neurosis, when the ego cannot satisfy the id needs; psychosis, when the ego breaks with the external reality; and psychopath, when the ego blatantly disregards moral and ethical demands of the superego. Of these personality disorders, the Freudian psychopathology mainly deals with neurosis. The chapter goes on to explain what Skinner's theory was on personality. He starts off with Skinner's science of human behavior. To him, behavior is what an organism is doing and it is observed by another observer. Behavior is also determined, lawful, and hence, and can be predicted and controlled. Occurrence, change, and elimination of behavior are determined by external conditions rather than external forces. Human beings are subjected to the same principles of conditioning as animals are. Hence, the findings from animal studies can be generalized to human behavior. There is no enduring structure of personality or self. A self is simply a device of representing a functionally unified system of responses, or in a more simple term, a self is a repertoire of behavior appropriate to a given set of contingencies. For Skinner, such concepts as personality or self are operational for his science of behavior. Instead of attempting to analyze the dynamics of the imagined internal structure of the mind, Skinner proposes a causal or functional analysis of behavior, an analysis of the cause and effect relationships between the external environmental conditions and the behavior of the individual organism. Basically, cutting it to the study of a person or the person's behavior. Skinner was well known with his experiment on Pavlov's dog, which gives us a background on respondent behavior. Is either an unconditioned or a conditioned response, which means it's unlearned or it's a learned response. In the experiment, he used Pavlov's dog and a bell to get the dog to know when feeding time is happening. So what he did was he would ring the bell, and as soon as the bell would ring, he noticed that the dog would start salivating. And because the bell sound is associated with food, that's the reason why the dog would start salivating. So he learned that the dog learned that was a conditioned response. Based off of this one experiment, the study of classical conditioning helps us understand some of our behavior patterns, such as the development of fear or affection associated with one's negative, which is painful, or positive, which is pleasant experience. According to Skinner, human behavior can accurately predict when the reinforcement conditions are strictly controlled, but he was never certain about the outcome of punishment conditions. Punishment, by representing a strong aversive stimulus, tends to result also in avoidance and withdrawal reactions, and escape from the source of pain. He gives an example of a child being abused by parents, often tend to avoid not only their parents but also the adults in general. Skinner also studied what behavior would be like if there were schedules of reinforcement. The reinforcement schedule is roughly divided into two types: continuous reinforcement and intermittent or partial reinforcement. In the continuous schedule, reinforcement is given after every correct response, such as regular reinforcing conditions can easily be created and learning can take place very rapidly. However, he explains, in our everyday life, such a condition is rare. Our good or worthy behavior is not always rewarded or recognized. There are four major types of scheduled reinforcement. The first one is fixed interval reinforcement schedule, which is the organism is reinforced for its correct response at specifically fixed intervals, which could be once every 5 minutes, for an example. The second one is variable interval reinforcement schedule. The organism is reinforced for its correct response at specific but random intervals. So 3 minutes, 5 minutes, or 2 minute intervals in sequence. Fixed ratio reinforcement schedule is the organism is reinforced for performing a specifically fixed number of responses.
So, for example, we could say a child is rewarded for cleaning his room once a week. And the fourth one would be
The
variable
objective
ratio
of the
reinforcement
Skinnerian
schedule.
behavior
The
therapy is
organism
therefore
is
to remove
reinforced
or
by
modify
performing a
the
specific but
subject's
random number
maladjusted
of
behavior by
responses.
providing new effective contingencies of reinforcement. The question of what is and who defines maladjusted or dangerous behavior poses, however, a nagging problem. For Skinner, however, the question of how any behavior, normal or abnormal, can be shaped and altered technology of human behavior is more important than the question of why. Phenomenological theory focuses on the theoretical framework to psychoanalysis and behaviorism, or the third force in American psychology, as Abraham Maslow once called it. Phenomenological reduction is an act of eliminating or suspending all assumptions and beliefs that influence our perception and cognition, so that we can understand the true essence of human consciousness. In other words, we do not perceive anything around us but selectively, depending on our personal need, interest, and concern. We can also reject and change our environment and create a new one by constructing new meanings for our life world. Reality is what you make it to be through our subjective experience here and now. Personality is therefore not merely determined by instinctual needs or environmental stimuli, but a formative process of becoming a whole person. Is quite optimistic and active. All organisms, according to Rogers, have an inherent tendency to maintain and enhance their quality of life to the fullest. In other words, every organism has innate force to grow and actualize its constructive potentials. Like other organisms, human beings according to Rogers, one basic tendency, human beings and striving to actualize, maintain, and enhance evil or the experiencing organism. Human destructiveness, unlike other organisms, only human beings can self-actualize because they have consciousness and self-awareness, which enables them to make free choices states that everyone for has becoming the potential unique people, and the need and the desire for growth, and this constructive force for growth is rooted within the individual. Personality is a process of actualizing or fulfilling the self potential. Maslow's hierarchy of human needs, according to Maslow's hierarchy is based on the assumption that human beings are motivated by 5 universal basic needs, which is that can be satisfied food, in a water, hierarchical oxygen, order, etc. In terms the of second most important or is relative. Safety. So that means security, needs, stability, dependency, lower level needs, freedom of fear, anxiety, and before chaos. The higher level needs. Need for structure, these basic needs, order, law, are limits, in order for their strength, potency, and psychological safety, belongingness, and love is third. Esteem and intimate feelings of actualization needs, affection, caring and sharing, ecstasy, and responsibility with close people. Esteem is fourth. The desires for strength, achievement, adequacy, mastery, and competency, confidence, independence, and freedom, and the desire for reputation or prestige, status, dominance, recognition, attention, importance, or appreciation.
And lastly, self actualization, which is the desire for self fulfillment, to the tendency for him to become actualized in what he is potential. Although all basic needs are biologically based, they are potentialities or latent capacities, not final actualizations. The basic needs are growth fostering forces, but these forces can be stiffed by growth discouraging forces such as regression, fear, pain of growth, and ignorance. As Maslow once stated, growth has not only rewards and pleasures, but also many intrinsic pains and always will have. Each step forward is a step into the unfamiliar and is possibly dangerous. It is also often means giving up a simpler and easier and less effortful life in exchange for a more demanding, more responsible, more difficult life. Growth forward is a spirit is sorry. Growth forward is a spite of these losses, therefore requires courage, will, choice, and strength in an individual as well as protection, permission, and encouragement from the environment, especially for a child.